Because I will ask in Russian, so if you need. Okay. And everybody can talk in Russian. Cool. День добрый. Работает ли у нас?
Good morning. Let's check if all the mics are working here. Ilya, hello. So, good morning. Let's begin. My name is Boris Ryabov, and judging by how we are doing this morning, it is likely to be something informal, and conversations for the eternity are sometimes more important than talking to larger audience. So I think we can touch upon some interesting topics. So, let me introduce our panelists. I would like to introduce our honored guests. So strange as it may seem, I would like to begin with Victoria Dobrovolska, the Innovations Agency of the City of Moscow. And then we have Val Gerdes, a partner of Innovate Global Ventures, Vasily Ivanov, an advisor on ICO and cryptocurrencies, Daniel Kozlov, a partner in Global Venture Alliance and Launch Gurus, Ilya Slutsky, the managing partner of MedMe, and Dmitry Chikhachov, the managing partner of Runa Capital, who really contributed to our alliance, and finally Boris Gruzovsky, a journalist for Forbes Russia and an economist. So first of all, welcome, and maybe you can notice that we have people representing different professions and disciplines, and maybe with different outlooks, and we talked to all of our panelists. So let's see what range of opinions we get. And I'm Boris Ryabov, the managing partner of Bright Capital. So the topic I would like to introduce. Our topic is Moscow, a megacity as a startup trampoline. So where is Moscow launching its startup? So the topic may seem a little bit vague, but it all began like this. We started communication with some officials, governmental officials from Yakutsk and Ivanovo regions, and we found out an interesting story. In both regions, they have an understanding of a transit ideology of how people live in these cities. So people come from some small places, regions, settlements, to the city of Yakutsk, and the same with the city of Ivanovo. Then they leave, and this is a well-known model because they have universities and higher schools, but the cities do not offer them opportunities for self-actualization. So this is really a trampoline. So a female friend of mine first jumped up to Blagoveshchensk, then to Moscow, and then to Los Angeles. So we're talking about mobile people. This is a very active part of our societies, those who create businesses and assume risks, those who create the future in a certain sense. And we see a transformation of this mobility. This is no longer a solution in our life. We can become a digital nomad. And what's exciting, the way Moscow looks at this process. We are all excited to know how our technological future is created. And we are all involved in this future. And all of us are interested in this or that way in the future of Moscow in the context of trends I just mentioned. And it's interesting to trace and identify processes. And regarding the city, how the Innovations Agency perceives the role of the city in the work with this technological part of the human capital, if we of course can talk about a human capital as something impersonal. So you see it like getting the best from everywhere, or do we believe to be a trampoline, a jumping board? Good morning. My name is Victoria. So once again, Moscow has a number of positions with regard to that question. So first of all, I would like to highlight 3 points. So Moscow is a mega city with a population of 15 million people. So it's a major market. And when we are talking about that trampoline, we are jumping up to developed markets. And earlier, our mayor at one of the panel discussions said that Moscow creates opportunities for the neighboring regions. So we're not afraid of people leaving. People come and go. This is about traffic. So also, secondly, people compete for human resources. And it's no sacramental puzzle. What's going on in the cities either retains people or creates conditions that make them leave. So what Moscow does today to retain people, to retain entrepreneurs, which are involved in developing the city and the marketing, improving the living standards and the well-being of the city. So it's about new models of educational formats, different international partnership formats with wider technological elites, which are anchors for the big cities. And if we would look into megacities, we have those technological elites, young entrepreneurs who aspire for knowledge, for experience, who want to be part of something substantial and important. So Moscow is on the way of creating R&D centers or hubs which will become anchors for the most talented, for people which are ready to run the risks. And of course, people should leave to gain a completely different experience and to be back to their to the city they live in and to transform it. So trends related with high mobility are based on the desire to communicate with peers and to actualize your own ambitions. And we cannot prevent people from being ambitious, and the city tries to create conditions for entrepreneurs to be able to live and be back. So with our technological elites, with companies like Mail.ru, Yandex, bigger pharma companies, we are negotiating the possibility of partnership programs. It's like when you have two cities where the company is present, but you develop partnership programs on exchange in teams, in startups, to make other markets available for people. So Moscow is a truly big market with a population, as I said, of 15 million people. And it has a number of niches in all innovative industries which emerge at the crossroads of all new industries. So the basic support measures the city offers at the level of infrastructure, so these networks of technoparks, co-workings, we can criticize them, of course, but as for today, they have the target audience and they retain it. And there is a desire to raise the level of standards to attract startups from other cities who may win the competitions. But of course, where there is a way, where is the will, there is a way. So we have discussed earlier today, our colleagues from different associations, that the innovative ecosystems and the associations of entrepreneurs only exist in Russia for 10 years. And we will still have this traffic. We have people coming to our city, to our country. Okay, thank you. No doubt, we have people coming to our country. One small clarification. So you said that for Moscow, it's nice then in case a young guy was working in Moscow, but then he left for Boston to do the master's study in MNIT. But what Moscow can offer to people who would look at Russia from beyond the Atlantic? Can we work with people from the West? So, what Moscow can offer? Moscow is ready to become like a platform for pilot projects. So we are discussing smart city, which is a host of new industries. We have new areas and agglomerations the city is ready to offer for testing new projects, for pilot projects, and we have a big model of open inquiries when we attract projects so that they could use Moscow infrastructure as a testing ground and evaluate what's a market of 15 million people. Because at the end of the day, everything an entrepreneur does is intended for the end customer. So Moscow is like an owner offering its market to the customers. Yeah, of course you can see it like this, because if we don't work with the target audience, but the market is first of all about the customer, we live in a market. I would agree with that. And I would like to give the floor to Boris Grozovsky. Boris, if there are things you pay attention at, looking from a different angle, what would you say about a transit city? Okay, thank you. It's working. Can you hear me? I believe there are two types of attributes or characteristics modern cities have in terms of business. It's hard to be an entrepreneur amid a desert or in Antarctica. It's difficult to be a businessman when you don't have a big consumer market, when you lack a financial infrastructure to support you, and startups should be supported at different stages, and a fairly well developed network of financial services, and we can identify different characteristics for cities and countries which make them either convenient or not convenient for entrepreneurs. So the first type is related to economy, living standards and economic dynamics. Living standards can be already high, but in case the city and the country are not developing, it's difficult to be an entrepreneur there. And also the size of the market is important. As Victoria mentioned, 15 million people, constant influx of people, talents and money from all over the country. It all creates very favorable conditions for business climate. Then we should list some problems, because cities should be comfortable for businessmen in different senses. So clear and low taxes, transparent regulation, the possibility to come and go easily, when you don't have to wait for an entry visa for weeks. Also communications and transport connections with other cities and markets. All these series of types are among hard characteristics, but you also have soft characteristics for entrepreneurs. So technological businesses develop in cities which are easy to live in, and for entrepreneurs they should be easy to work in. So these cities are organized in a very democratic way. When you can get outside, enter a cafe, and the chance would be high that you meet your colleague at the cafe working at the same area, and you can exchange impressions and experience, and that occasional meeting can lead to can eventually lead to a contract or a partnership. And I've seen a number of times that we have a cluster around the Higher School of Economics at Mysnitskaya Street.
You can accidentally run into an entrepreneur who has a relation to the Higher School of Economics. In general, the city doesn't have these features. We have a very developed sphere of service. The law enforcement body who mostly engaged in law enforcement and rights support, but not the support of the political regime. So the democracy is quite important. Even while going here to the Moscow Urban Forum, everyone has bumped into huge number of fences, of boundaries and other stuff of fences. So Moscow partially, and it is shown in works of cartologists and urbanists, is the city of fences. When the fence shelters a fence from another fence, so for somebody not to penetrate somewhere. So even the territory of the forum, there's some kind of difficulties at the entrance, speakers, delegates, participants. So the modern cities, comfortable for entrepreneurs, lack this hierarchy system. They are absolutely democratic. You have the right to have the access to almost everywhere in the authorities, universities, and the minimum number of control, different surveillance systems, so on and so forth. Then the university academic environment. We do have universities, but they are not quite autonomous as it is necessary for the development of entrepreneurship. And the financial area, and partially even in research area. Unfortunately, I do think then to jump over some steps and cover this gap is not possible if you do not fulfill the second or the third class. It is even difficult to jump at the 10th class. So for the Moscow to become a very comfortable city for startups, particularly in technological sector, it is firstly necessary to somehow restore basic city freedoms, particularly the freedom of city retail, which used to be here at the beginning of the 90s, which we lack right now. We need to restore the diversity of city in terms of the services and different activities when it is not necessary to gain particular license or authorization for a jazz band or for a soul musician to play out in the street, and you don't have to pay any due to play out in the street. So we need to restore basic freedoms in different city activities, in trading, in art, in services. And when this spirit of freedom is going to come back to Moscow, so the next step, it is possible to see the dawn of the technological entrepreneurship. That's what I would like to say. It's a very interesting aspect, so it occurs. I think that we need to focus on that, as mostly we're going to cover this issue. It turns out that we do have this the cake, and it's a kind of a cherry on the top of this cake. So in the second point, which I've heard, so democratic spheres are very important, in democratic environments are very important university clusters. So I'm going to jump, not according to scenario, to Dmitry Chikachov. So why we know you in many roles, but I would like to see your experience from trade unions. You have a very unique thing affected. What you do is a physical, technological union. So what in FISTech you have in particular, what have you managed to produce? Can I be heard? Thank you, Boris, for your question. I have already started to think some criteria according to which the city can become the pilgrimage place for entrepreneurs in universities, probably not in the right place, as first of all the talent should exist and then the human capital, and on the second place everything should be located, the freedom of coming and living, as it is impossible to create business without a talent, even with all the institutions and mechanisms in place to facilitate the business itself. As an example, I can give Singapore. It's a wonderful city where the government is doing everything for the freedom of business, but I assure you that in terms of the technological development, Singapore is lagging behind Moscow. The difference between Moscow and Singapore is in the number of graduates, high-quality graduates in technological sphere who have talents to produce these technological startups. Is a kind of pre-introduction. When it comes to the cluster of physical technological sphere, it has its peculiarity. First of all, it's the cluster which had a bottom-up effect. It was not made by the administrative decision, so let's create this technological park and technological cluster. It was a bottom-up effect, mostly due to the fee stack being clustered for a very long period of time. In the USSR, it used to be an integrated cluster in the Academy of Science, in our production facility in the military defense sector. Then all these links collapsed. But without this cluster, fee stack felt not very comfortable way. And the graduates of fee stack who were engaged in technological business, Sergei Belousov, Alexander Abramov, Yuri Alashev, Andrei Vashenko, I can still give you a very long list, but everybody was for the fate of fee stack and its competitiveness on the global arena in very rapidly changing environment. When we created fee stack union, we didn't have the aim to reform something big at the level of the country, at the level of the city. The task was very simple, is to facilitate the development of fee stack and to assist and facilitate its competitiveness development. So for us, it's partially just our aspiration and our target, as many businesses are based on the talent itself. And if this talent in the course of time is going to degrade, so our business in the long term are going to feel some miseries. That's a cluster which had a bottom-up effect, and it has some historical prerequisite. So that was a simple moment for us. So further on, we created the organization of graduates, fee stack union, and it was different from others in those ways which I have been mentioned already. It was created not by the graduates, for networking, for joint business doing. It was created by graduates for the higher institute, for the university itself. And undoubtedly, the development of the university facilitates the development of the city, facilitates the development of the country. So the main fact which proves that we were supported by the engine of innovation in the idea of creating the technological park, and we were supported by the Ministry of Communication, which included our technological park in their program. We did and we are still doing this small thing on our platform. We are trying to help the university, and we're contributing to the development of the city, to the development of the system in our country, of this big system. So I'd like to draw your attention to the following fact, this multiplying effect. So Dima, you have these, you have two rabbits in your head at the same time. Your networking which pushes that is strong, as many have many rabbits in their heads. So this is environment of which was created by the student. It has a huge content from different angles. So you have many different people. You have central motivation. It creates something good for your alma mater, mother. So this is interesting thing which is quite characteristic for these strong communities. In this situation, it turns out that you can have a right request to which the city can react. Is it right? Yes, absolutely right. In FISTech Union, we don't have any person who is engaged only in FISTech Union. All active members, they are at the same time active entrepreneurs. And on work for FISTech Union, they spend, of course, less time than on the regular work, 80 to 20%, the combination, thanks to synergy and network effect. There's many graduates with their own businesses, with their wide network effect. They are actively engaged in this work, so we happen to have a very huge synergy effect when Alexander Abramov and Mr. Novosel, Mr. Belousov get together in one room, Mr. Yakunin, and I can give you a longer list. We have a huge number of great graduates. So when they support this FISTech Union in this room, we have not only a very interesting discussion, the resource capabilities are enormous. For me, it is vivid that FISTech is doing that, and FISTech looks like MIT, so the strength of network, but not like the money supported to them. I would like to ask Ilya Slutsky, you work with the youngsters in many aspects. It is one of the pillars of how you work with MedMe. You have a special digital medicine project. So can you imagine what should be the circumstances when this type of cooperation with talents, getting them in so kind of communities can multiply, or it's how it is? Who can influence that? Thank you very much. This topic is very relevant, and it is not that simple, as we work in different areas where the success happens thanks to the combination and intersection of different specialists. In order to do something in digital medicine, in any breakthrough in biotech, we require people of different specialities speaking different languages, and the task to create this pool of talent in this sphere is tried to be tackled in many countries. There are some things which are quite easy to understand. The easy to understand thing is a cluster environment, which is based in the university, providing those different people of different specialities. There are some obvious things that need to create the infrastructure for communication among these people, and there are some not obvious things going on further, how to make them interchange, to have this so-called cross-blossoming effect when there are some breakthrough ideas happening, how to help these people implement their breakthrough ideas. We're working in medicine clusters in different countries. We work with companies in Italy, in Poland, in France, and in all the situations we see different challenges which Moscow faces as well. Although Moscow, being a huge city, metropolis, has additional challenges connected with the following issues, is, for example, 600,000 live in one district. There are 150,000 of students, and the students from the medical faculty of Moscow State University and the students of FISTech do require less trivial approach, and more sophisticated approach is required. So my hypothesis is that it is not the issue of the standard infrastructure, accelerators, incubators, and so on and so forth. It is the very important content issue. The content is a big integral part of this infrastructure development for breakthrough teams. When I'm talking about content, I imply that they are to get together with the right focus. If they meet in the bar, it is one content environment. If they meet at the conference, it's a different content environment. It's a very huge, complicated challenge. We see that in many clusters it's not tackled quite successfully. It might be somehow tackled in Silicon Valley in California, for instance, where there is a constant ongoing life, a huge content where people get together, where they find each other, where they have common interests, where they create something and they start to move somewhere. It is the first challenge. The second challenge is to create and ambitions among these people. When we think about Moscow, which one of the hugest agglomerations in the world, we cannot live with a situation when we have a number of just not very sophisticated startups. We're all dreaming of these startups to become quite powerful in the world arena, to move them, and who want to change the world, who want to be number one in the world. That's why to create this kind of people with this ambition is a huge problem, which is faced not only in Moscow. This kind of people in a low amount to create environment to open their eyes and to have a broader view and to create something that hasn't been done yet. It's one of the biggest challenges. It is the question how to help them to develop, to acquire entrepreneur skills, as we see a huge number of startups, so-called startups, which are trying to become corporations, but they do not have and they haven't acquired the basic skills.
So, and that leads to their ruin. You may remember the example of a wonderful unicorn in India, like Snap-in. I don't recall the name. So, but a company with a turnover of 1 billion. But the lack of basic hygienic management skills led to it. Snapchat being a billion-worth company, so they hired a CEO. So she came to a company with hundreds of millions of cash, but the company didn't have any idea of what cash was. So the content environment imposed on the space should stimulate all those things, and this is a very demanding challenge for a huge system like Moscow. And the question was, what produces that content environment? So it's like the universe of Star Trek produces a Diamantis, and we have the... So this is this all originates from the science fiction of the 1970s. So at a certain point of time we had no singularity universe, and some people got together and they created it. So if a city wants some breakthroughs, it should create conditions for people who are ready to create that content. Otherwise you are not having teams, ambitions, skills to implement all those ambitions. Thank you. That diversity can be understood in different way. That diversity is about having people from different professions and different students together, and also people with different outlooks, and people have the same rights as those who think differently. And this is the correct impulse. Now I would like to ask Val, this is a question in Russian. So your experience, you work with technological companies in very different places in the world, in Singapore, in Silicon Valley. Now you are in Russia. So where are the factors which attract people? Well, imagine there is an ambitious person, and he can choose whether he would like to make business in Russia with the developers in Russia, or to go to San Francisco or to Singapore. Where are the factors which attract different clusters of ambitious and strong entrepreneurs?
In English is okay? Synchronny, you guys are Busy? All right, cool. I won't speak too fast, although I get excited and speak very quickly. Thank you for letting me be here. It's a great question, and I think there's what we talked about earlier, the trampoline or the dynamic movement into and out of cities or places like Moscow, or from the suburban or maybe the regional centers into Moscow. And then there's the idea of content and how Moscow is doing this, and it's an extraordinary place, I think, on both of these levels, and I'll try to bring them together very, very quickly. Our main offices are in Palo Alto and Silicon Valley, so in a lot of ways we're very fortunate, we're very lucky in some ways. We have this ecosystem built for us, and it wasn't built in a conscious way in many ways, right? It was built kind of, it just happened, and kind of there's a lot of factors involved in it, but it happened relatively organically. And of course that place is blessed with Berkeley and Stanford, right? I'm a graduate of Stanford, so I'm a little bit biased, but we also teach and work with Skydeck in Berkeley as well. And certainly those are drivers, right? Those are major drivers of the economy, and they have been historically from the very beginning, right? From the time of Frank Terman, one of the first rectors at Stanford, who basically allowed professors, not only allowed, but encouraged them to step out of their academic roles and into industry. Right? So it wasn't a pure academic work. They had to be an advisor or a technical advisor for a startup. So a very interesting move. And second, he did really cool things with licensing, with allowing university property and intellectual property to be spun out into commercial work. But an interesting factor about those places, 1 in 3 students at Stanford and at Berkeley, before they graduate in their undergraduate degree, is involved in a startup. 1 in 3, right? So it's a combination of great work, as FISTEC is an example of, right? As of the brilliant universities, and that really is, I agree, that the talent pool here is powerful, and it's recognized in Silicon Valley. We have we work a lot with Y Combinator and 500, and probably about 6-7 years ago, very rare to see Russian, Belarusian, Ukrainian startups coming into those areas, and that's just one canary in the mine, so to speak, right? One indicator. But in the last batches, there's been 1, 2, about 3 Russian or CIS originated startups per batch, which is actually extraordinary, right? And the really cool thing on the movement, right, is a lot of these guys are from Belarus, are from Novosibirsk, are from all of these guys. A lot of them make it through Moscow as a point. They go into these accelerator programs, for example. So it's a wonderful 3-month exposure to a Silicon Valley or a Boston or whatever point in the world they're working at, right? And here's the other interesting thing I think that happens, is that they come back. And we have very specific cases. We're early stage specialists, so we work very much with, or I do, with that part. And I can mention 1, 2, 3 dozen examples in Russia, specifically around, literally this morning, a very, very smart engineer from Los Angeles, Russian speaking, after about 5-6 years absence, came back to Moscow, and he's building his engineering team here. StatSpot, right? Just came back, they raised, I think, 2.4. Also worked with them a little bit in 500. Exor, a number of small early stage startups exposed there, right? Build the sales, build the business dev, build the fundraising, right? They have access to the exits there, which is very interesting, right? Or around the world, which is one of the key pieces, which is hard. But they come back here to build the engineering talent, which is very, very important, right? Because talent is key. And there's a lot of reasons for that. 1 is they're from here. 2, it's a little bit easier. 3, perhaps the economics, right? The currency difference. It's just very difficult to find an engineer of good quality for decent money in Silicon Valley right now. So the movement is back and forth of people, of money. It's extremely dynamic. It's, I mean, visas and language, which are one of the 2 big things not requiring. There's a generation of startuppers right now that are people of the world, right? They're Muscovites in their hearts perhaps, or Russians in their hearts, but they really travel back and forth. So it's not necessarily a brain drain or an export of talent, right? It's really a two-way street, which is I hope it'll continue. I think it's pretty fascinating. That's similar with funds, right? With a lot of venture funds. Most of you have offices around the world, or you're extremely well traveled. You're investing, or you're looking for trends, or you're making partnerships and sales and supporting your portfolio companies everywhere. And the tough part there sometimes is for us, and this is another small indicator, is that when investors from Russia, for example, as far as startups are investing in, Boris, I'm sure you know this very well, into great startups, right? They might have Russian roots, there might be, or CIS roots, there might not be. There the challenges, and you're competing on great deals, right? With the Sequoias, with the Kleiners, with the Khoslas, with all these great drivers there. The challenge there for us as well, sometimes, especially the funds we help as well, is that these startups say, hey, we've got Khosla, why do we want to take money from you? Who are you, right? Fistek, amazing place, I've heard about it, but it's far away, right? It's hard. And so it's hard to make an argument of market access, right? China, India, some of these guys can say, okay, yeah, we've got a great market, you want to take our money because we'll give it to you. But Russia, it's tougher. It's a tougher argument. And the only argument we've been able to make so far is access to talent. It's really, that's the place. So content, and the other piece, the last piece I'll finish with that overlays is that, so with this talent, with this engineering talent, there's that other layer that you talked about, and it's softer. It's not a hard technical education, which is critical, right? It's a lot easier to make a great technologist, give them marketing skills, rather than take a great marketer and give them technology skills, right? But there so often happens here, and we see it especially in the early stages, right? Where you have a great technology, a brilliant mind, a super mousetrap, but you have no idea what the mouse is. Right? What's the product? How do you productize? How do you commercialize this? How do you, and not to speak about even, as you mentioned, the ambitions, the culture, the fluency. And it's very difficult sometimes because you're up against world-class folks who can pitch the hell out of you, right, in Silicon Valley. You're competing against them for great money, for great exits, right? So we've got the talent here. It's a fantastic pool, right? How can we add that layer? It's kind of an open question, right, of culture. And what we often do is we bring Techstars here. We'll do the Techstars week in December. We're bringing Startup Grind. We're bringing, even just Skyping in folks who are coming in and helping out here initially, and I'm sure you're doing that a lot. And also, of course, the simplest thing is buy a plane ticket and just spend a few months or a year or two there and just figuring it out on your own, getting fluent in that language as far as things are, and then coming back and really making hay. So,
Спасибо, Вэл.
Да, пожалуйста.
Интересный взгляд.
Okay, a very interesting outlook. It's clear that's a model of how you can create a company in a number of continents with an engineering center in one country and a sales office in another. So, but here in Russia, where can a Russian company exit? So, if it's being developed in most countries of the world, it is being sold to wonderful corporate strategists. So they have a business related to that, and they offer demand for these technologies. And a city often positions itself as a corporation, and it has to do with state capitalism we have. But in a sound, a healthy society, a corporation is a corporation. So, Daniil, you have two accelerators with IKEA and with Pepsi. Well, actually, and Faberlic. So interestingly, what can you tell us about accelerators and corporations in our case? So is our patient alive, or should we abandon the very idea of corporations and entrepreneurs should act locally? Boris, I would agree that a corporation is an integral component of an ecosystem, and we shouldn't refer to the Silicon Valley. So the city provides a furnace and oven, and investor gives fuel like wood. we shouldn't talk only about exits, but about contracts. You need a big, nice contract which would allow us to subsequently get a new contract with a big company. You need a customer for your product. So also B2C products, but in the B2B sector, there is a path you need to lay down. So about a year and a half and 2 years, the companies in Moscow started to wake up. Before, we would meet our partners like once a month or once in 2 months. Last year, we started to meet up 3 times a month, and now we meet weekly. So accelerators. In many ways, they need to find a good idea of how to interact with corporations. And there are a number of ways of how a city can help. They create environment for corporations, and they should help startups in their development. The first golden rules in the system of innovations is stay away, don't hamper. And hampering is not just being an opponent, but it may be some doing something unreasonable, and you have some free institutes which offer their help. They say, we would like the state to help startups, and all our programs would be free. We would do it as we see it. Please come and see our startups. Instead, they should rather say, corporations, let's think what you need. Let's build something, some logics, the correct logics of the program, which would integrate into the startup. If the investor would see that the program failed, didn't bring any helpful results, the investor may be disappointed in the entire market. And secondly, if you give the corporation something for free, and this is an interesting policy for the city and for any public development institution, you shouldn't be in the situation when corporations are used to getting something for free. They need to pay for startups, for talents and technologies they attract into corporations.
As in most successful ecosystems, corporations do pay for that, and they pay tens of millions of US dollars per year. So the question is, you're talking about corporations. So what private corporations, for example, Rosatom is doing something. There is a decree by the president to become cultural. But it's not the question to Moscow, but to the structure of our economy. Who are the flagship companies here? First of all, on the startup market is international corporations, which huge local representativeness, PepsiCo, Robert Lennon's, other companies. These are huge international corporations which do understand that they need to engage in innovations. It is necessary to be done. So now it is in Russia already. For example, in CK, IKEA, it is from Russia. IKEA has launched its first accelerator innovation program here in Khimki. So it is interesting. So it shows that Moscow, being a cluster, can offer interesting factoring to whether you startup or for IKEA to start. So in this case, Khimki, but Khimki is a huge cluster together with Moscow. On the other hand, we see private Russian corporations, Faberlic, for instance, and other companies, Morton, which are engaged in this game. State-owned corporations are doing that in Lesmont. They are starting to study this area, but the decision-making process is not that fast. So the cumbersome system of this companies doesn't allow to do that. The second point I would like to stress that we need to remember that corporations are engaged in innovations when they achieve a kind of level of perception. So the hierarchy of Mr. Maslov, if you have bumped into that, when first of all you need to fulfill your basic needs, food, security, the other things. So after that, you start to develop ecosystem and maybe charity activity. You start to create more sophisticated structures where there are other beneficiaries take part. When these beneficiaries engage in your system, so there is a number of vivid examples. We go to huge energy companies. They say we are interested in innovation, so let's discuss that. So we have discussed that. Let's make a program, and we sent different material, and we have no response. Everything was active about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and there is no response for a couple of weeks. So we asked them, why don't you give any response? We have 2 turbines exploding in somewhere near Moscow, so we have some other priorities. So until we fulfill this issue, when we have a level playing ground in our municipality, in the city, this comfortable environment for the corporations, they do not evolve to the level when they start to engage with startups. And the companies which evolve, these are multinational, huge companies, and they have a global approach. I understand that you're optimist, Boris. I have a question to you. We are all optimists here. I'm not quite optimistic in this regard. I have a philosophic approach and philosophical perception. If we don't have bread, butter is no need at all. So how there is a corporation, they are understanding that it is necessary to do. There are some points where clusters are developed. We redevelop university clusters. So how can we be prepared for the future? Future is going to come anyway, whether we want or not. So how can you see that? So this forthcoming future is inevitable. What is it going to do with this area? Of course, in this very scientific approach, when we study as a city, as an entrepreneurship, as a business, so what is going to happen? I'm not going to calm you down. I would like to be an optimist, as it is clear. We can strive for that a particular period of our history. It is very difficult to move away from global trends. And they are leading us to the situation when huge mega cities with very developed technological environment are becoming more diverse inside. They cease to be these mono cities, quite similar streets, similar malls, similar elements of service sector, and different layout similarities. The cities are moving towards diversification in people, in entrepreneur, in the form of activities in the street, in the live activity. And these cities are learning how to get benefit out of these ethnic, intellectual, and different kinds of diversities. It is some kind of molten effect where we can get something new out of something old. And we're not going to make everything similar. If we like the concept of a particular park, let's turn all the parks into this kind of park, as for example, Gorky Park. If you like the concept of street development, let's do the same streets everywhere around the city, interchanges of the cities, pedestrian bridges in roads. We do not to make the single model for everything. If we do not do that, so the environment is going to develop for startups, and the technological entrepreneurs are going to feel comfortable in this sphere, in this environment. I would like to be brief. So it has something to do with the program for entrepreneurs. I see very often that we have a particular perception of different institutions of development. Let's create a program, it's going to work. It is a global perception, it's a huge program for everyone. But it doesn't work like this. So provide the environment for the private players who are going to create different environments. And, we need to move step by step. And if we have technological movement, we all know there's a period of crypto anarchy emerging in and its penetration in the mass sector. So I would like to mention that Moscow can offer to this layer of technological entrepreneurship, which is somewhere in the middle of the hype, for those people who live not on a single planet, because this story is probably from other planets. So Vasily, so without the structure itself, how it is happening for you, for the community you deal with on a daily basis, for those who are engaged in new financial technologies like blockchain, who are creating decentralized environment. Why do you need a city? Do you need technological parks? Do you need venture investors? I don't think that it is a need for you. Do you require acceleration programs? Why do you need a city in this regard? How are you going to make decisions? How is your community making decisions where to move, where to turn out? I have the following story. In the following case, particularly my sphere of engagement, I deal with different kinds of work with cryptocurrencies and new technologies. This kind of business is not linked to a particular location, so it allows to do business from any place in the world, as well as mentioned already. It is a new concept. The person of the company which lives and which moves around different places and get new knowledge from every place. It can acquire new things from any place. So these new formatted people and new formation companies, it's an absolutely different case. They do not need technological parks. They do not need financial institutions, as Boris has mentioned. As in order to do business, you need some financial institutions, local institutions. Now, new technologies, cryptocurrencies allow to move away from that. So we have changed the system itself when it comes to exchange of information. So thanks to internet, you can acquire any knowledge from any place in the world with huge interaction. If we used to, in our universities, with live lessons, you had more interactions and effect was high. So online you can acquire any knowledge. In this regard, it seems to me that we are developing the following case. The city is becoming the place for life. So the person chooses a place for a comfortable livelihood. So he chooses a place not based on the number of technological parks, not on the number of programs affected by the government of the city. There are some clear criteria, starting with the low level of Maslow's pyramid. These are basic things like the lack of traffic congestions, the huge number of parks, high level of security, so on and so forth. So now, new technologies which are emerging, they help to solve many issues usually tackled by traditional institutions. So sooner or later we are going to find ourselves in the situation comparing, for example, internet with the newspapers. Newspapers do exist, but their role has been diminishing, and everybody searching for the news in the internet. So it seems to me that the faster we move, the faster new situations going to happen. So when we're not linked to the location if there is a lack of institutions, so we won't just require them at all in the future. It's going to be in principle a new case, and cryptocurrencies, blockchain, internet are going to help in this regard. So we're not going to have kind of discussion. We have many sessions, very brief sessions. It's unfortunate for me. I would spend another 2 hours with you, but I'm going to conclude, summarize somehow by one phrase what we are talking about here. You know, the technological entrepreneurship is just a phrase. It is the capability of people to take risks, and people who are ready to undertake risks. They don't want to discount their future, so they are ready to take risks. They are really into their life. And I would like to see from the city to give me the opportunity to live and not to discount my life. I'd like people around me to think about the future, about their own future, a long-term perspective. As for the officials, long-term perspective, for the long-term perspective I have mentioned already. So along with that, I should be open to everything. I don't know the direction where the future is going to come from. Nobody knows where from the future is going to come to us. So we need to understand if the government has a particular function. I know where the future is going to come from. Dmitry knows where the future is going to come from. And it's great that I know Dmitry. So the future is coming from the next generation. And we need to work for the pool of the talents, not for the direction of the startups. The talent, compared with the oil, is a resource within a renewable resource. We need to teach and to learn how to renew this resource, as with to move to the Silicon Valley, to Berlin, to the Los Angeles. Yes, it's great. It is an investment into our future, as this talent is going to come back. To open R&D centers with a better attitude to us, and better perception among the investors is going to be a dividend for us in the future. So this is idea of a global community, of globality implies. So listen, you don't need to create enemies. Do not create enemies, as people help to create this future somewhere. It's better to have a peaceful approach in your heart, thinking about the place where you are from. Do not create enemies in those people who live in your country. It is possible that they are going back to your country. Thank you very much for your participation. We are going to be moved out of here. We're going to have a presentation. So it's unfortunate for me to conclude here. Thank you very much for the participation.